thank you for joining us. This is one of a series of webinars that we have organised as part of our Northern Ireland Botanical Skills Project, which aims to support botanists across the skills spectrum with training, events and online talks like this. And I particularly want to thank our funder, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, DAERA, who have funded our project in Northern Ireland. And of course, this whole thing is organised by the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, whose logo is up here. This is the first in a winter-long series of talks. We've got talks most Tuesday nights through winter. We have a little bit of a gap around Christmas because we imagine people might be away visiting family and so on. But next week we've got Getting Started with Rushes, which is for beginners. The week after, Mark joins us again to talk about Leylandia and their lookalikes. And of course, across the rest of that series, we have talks on club mosses, we have talks on environmental robotics, we have talks about using plant ID apps and how good they are, about hawthorns, about botanical data and protected area conservation. There are things across all botanical topics to enjoy. So if you've just found this webinar so far, have a look at the whole series. All of those talks, we intend to record them. So if there's anything that you miss in the moment, these will go up on YouTube subsequently. And of course, you can share them with your friends. And at the end of this talk, there will be a little bit of time, I think, for a few questions. So if during this any questions occur to you, you'll notice there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can drop some questions in there, and we'll get through some of those at the end of this talk. And now I get to introduce our speaker for this evening, Mark Duffell. It's a real pleasure to have Mark along with us. Mark is a passionate botanist and horticulturalist who has an exceptional breadth of knowledge of our flora. His outstanding field skills have been recognised by the BSBI, and he he's one of our gold standard surveyors for the Field Identification Skills Certificate, FISCs. Mark works closely with the BSBI. He's on the Committee for England and acts as a referee for non-native shrubs, and also helped to develop and promote FISCs through the FISC Development Working Group. He's also an experienced tutor and shares his experience with universities, consultancies, environmental organisations and individuals, both in the classroom and out in the field. So I am delighted to hand over to Mark.
Thank you for that introduction. That's made me feel a bit big-headed, but yes, thank you, James. So tonight's talk is on an etymological flora of Britain and Ireland. So looking at the naming of plants, a little bit about why plants are named, but also what do those names mean. And I've put a note in the chat box that if you want to make any comments, you can use the QA area and Q&A area. So I'm just getting my slides finally sorted. Yep, that will do. So yes, I must express that I'm not an expert. I'm an enthusiastic amateur when it comes to etymology. It's been a lifelong interest. For some reason, I think it started when I kept tropical fish. I used to have many aquariums in my old bedroom as a child. And a lot of the fish did not have common names, they had scientific names. And I just got very familiar and very comfortable using scientific names. And from that, I started to wonder, well, what does better splendens mean? Splendens means splendid. Well, that fits that, and so on. So it grew out of that interest. So over the course of tonight's talks, we're going to look at scientific names and their importance to botany and also other natural history organisms. Why common names are fine, and you can use those as well, but why there can be some challenges and issues with those. So it can seem a bit elitist to use scientific names, but actually they're really important to use because they can convey generally a message that everyone, even globally, will understand. So that's, again, why bothering with scientific names. And then we'll look at some of the origins and meanings behind the names as well. And the origins could be a medical past use, a real or perceived use, habitat or habit of a plant. So is it an upright plant or a procumbent, a trailing plant? The form of a plant, so it could be the colour, shape, size, could be a life cycle, so annual, perennial, or growth form. And then it could be a cultural usage as well. And there's a few oddities as well. So hopefully I can make what might seem initially quite a dry topic into an entertaining talk for you. So yeah, sit back and listen, because I don't know what it's like for you, but it's actually hammering down with rain outside at the moment, and hopefully enjoy tonight. So something I remember from school days in my primary school, sort of upper primary school, is that one of the spelling tests we had was for rhododendron, and struggling to spell that and get that right. And then again, once you break it down, rhodo and dendron, or dendros, you realize, oh, it's rose tree, and that again made it a bit more approachable. And a little bit of Latin or Greek can actually help you understand and be able to read many foreign floras. So I've got a French sedge book, which I can't read French, but the bit of Latin and Greek I know has helped me to be able to read an awful lot of it. Same with Spanish or Portuguese floras. So as James mentioned, I teach a lot. And when teaching, I sometimes find students just might not want to engage with scientific names. I teach quite regularly for groups like the Open University, and they might not have a scientific or a biological background. They may be very trained in their particular field, but not in these areas. And they often find scientific names, they just don't engage, or they'll say, oh, I'm never going to get round to that. And we've got a real mouthful here, haven't we? Metazoic, Leptostroboides. And these are some of the comments that I've had from students. How am I ever meant to remember that, let alone spell it? Which is a fair point. And many will just say, I'll stick to Dawn Redwood. And then, of course, we have the issue that a species like this, which is Avenella flexuosa, which some of you will go, oh, I've never heard of that. Of course, names can change. So you might know it more as a synonym, Deschampsia flexuosa. So again, there are times when you might just stick to the common names because they appear to be more static, shall we say. So scientific names can change, which is more than we'll cover in this webinar, but they could change because there's a precedent. Somebody had already named this particular plant Avenella, and then it's got changed away from Deschampsia and so on. So why I would recommend people to start learning scientific names is, and I've actually had a really nice question about this from a lady emailing in, was she finds remembering plant names are a huge challenge. And is there a sort of systematic way to help beginners to remember all these names? Well, it is breaking the names down, because at the moment that Avenella flexuosa is just a string of letters. But once you can work out that Ella means small, and Avena or Avena means oat, it's a small oat that's flexuous. So it means something a bit more. It almost gives the plant a bit of a personality. So now I mentioned common names, so we could just use common names. Now we've got people, I'm presuming, from all over Britain and Ireland, and potentially even outside of Britain and Ireland on this webinar or watching this video. So we could use common names. So these are just some of the common names I've collected for a particular group of plants, a plant called bluebell. And here there's at least 75 common names, and there's more. You'll start to see that they're all quite similar. They may overlap a bit. So you've got Granfigig Grig, Granfig Giggles, and Granmagig Wriggles. They're all a bit corruptions, aren't they? You can see that they're similar origins. There's lots of crow somethings and cuckoo somethings and goose somethings, and that's, to me, is actually telling me it's all the time of year when these were in flower. So when your goslings are around, you've probably got or when the geese are around, cuckoos arriving back when bluebells are there as well. And then there's some interesting names like squill. Well, to me, as a botanist, I tend to think of that as something, a coastal plant more. There's a harebell there, there's a periwinkle there. That harebell, to me, is a campanula, one of the harebell family. And then periwinkle, that to me is a vinca. So they can, you can see how you can get confusion. There's another common name, wild hyacinth, which I think is probably the closest to what we've got. So yeah, there's challenges there. I think it's slightly sad that we have lost some of these common names, because I would imagine, let's say, probably 100 years ago, or maybe even a little less than that, that if you went into your village and asked them the name for bluebell, some people might have called them bluebells, but other people might have had a local name, a vernacular name. And then you could travel 30 miles or even less to another village, and they'd have a slightly different name or even a completely different name. But I think with the publication of field guides and floras, we've had this sort of standardization or homogenization of common names. And I think in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a standard list of common names that the BSBI put out there as well, recommending to use. So we've maybe lost a little bit of interest and natural history interest by having different common names. But so these are all bluebells, or what I would call bluebells, in the background. These are all common names people have used for them in the past. But we start to look internationally. And if you were to look up what bluebell is in the British Isles, we tend to think, or Britain and Ireland, we tend to think of Hyacinthioides species. So Hyacinthioides non-scripta would be your common bluebell, English bluebell. Again, you see I'm using different names there. Spanish bluebell, Hyacinthioides hispanica, and so on. But of course, there's a classic case that in Scotland, bluebell supposedly is Campanula rotundifolia, which to me, as an English person, that would be harebell. So you can see complications could arise there. Then if you're in other bits of Europe, you'd have a plant called muscari, which to me, that is grape hyacinth. So quite a different plant. And then if you're in North America, there are three different things there. There's Mertensia virginica, which is Virginian bluebell, they call it. I can't remember the other two names. But all of these species, they fall into about three families. So we've got the old Liliaceae, Hyacinthioides and muscari fall in there. Harebell campanula is in its own family. The Phacelia and Mertensia, they're in the borage family, and Eustoma are in the gentian family. Oh, and I'm forgetting Australia as well. They've got Wallenbergia, which they call them their bluebells over there, and that's in the gentian family. The harebell family as well. So you can see there's a lot of potential confusion there if you were talking to an Australian botanist or a European botanist. And the same can happen for other common names. So in England, we tend to use, for mountain ash, we tend to use the name rowan, and we're talking about Sorbus orchiparia. I've noticed in Scottish and Welsh, I'm not sure about Irish, but they tend to have mountain ash as their common name. But no, that's an anglicised form of it. But again, you go to North America, they have two different sorbuses, so it's at least in the same family this time. But they also have a member of the olive family, an ash. To me, that's Fraxinus texensis, meaning an ash of Texas. And then also, if you go to North America, you've of course got a eucalyptus, one of the myrtle family. So what I think it does prove is that us Europeans are very good at naming other countries' flowers after things that we can remember. So, which is how we remember things best, isn't it? We associate things. So, oh, you're the flower that looks similar to the buttercup, or the flower that looks similar to the daisy, and so on. Maybe that was all a little bit Anglo-centric to you, and I'm getting very out of my comfort zone. I don't speak Welsh, so gone too quick. These are some of the common names for this particular plant, which I think is in every country in Britain and Ireland. So it's got various Welsh names here, and I had to look these up. I had no idea what they meant. But fair or fain means bean. Corsyth and course means swamp. Apologies to any Welsh people for my pronunciation. And then definitely apologies here. Tydalen and Bilion, a trifoliate or trefoil. So you can start to see, if you know this plant, the English names, you can see that they're talking similar things. So scientifically, it's Menianthes trifoliata. English name, or their vernacular name, would be bog bean, and you can see there's swamp bean in there, and they've also got trifoliate there from the species name, meaning three-leaved or trefoil. So imagine you were doing a site survey list and you were using any of these Welsh names to communicate to other people, non-Welsh people, or even a South Walian and a North Walian. Potentially there's going to be problems getting there. So we do have these scientific names which should mean that we can communicate effectively. Now, I find this particular species, I'm sure you're all shouting at the screen what this one is. This is one that the students sometimes will just be able to manage to identify, and again, immediately just say the name, and they'll say, oh yes, even if they only, the one thing they know is, oh, this is the bad one that we should get rid of. This is Rhododendron ponticum. And for some reason, they can say that, they can remember that. So it just shows that even people who don't think they know and want to engage with scientific names are actively doing so. Again, ask a child their favourite dinosaur and they'll no doubt tell you it's Triceratops or Tyrannosaurus Rex. So at that age, we're quite familiar and quite happy to use quite complicated words. I mean, Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops, they're not that easy, are they? So as I said, it helps to know what the names mean. So, and this is how I've remembered the names. So dendros is the same origin. Dendron is the origin of dendros and dendritic and all these words, which all mean tree-like. And then rhodo means red or rose. And so you've got rose tree, and its ponticum means it's from the Pontic region, which is the Black Sea area of southern areas of the Black Sea. And if you look, it's sort of the opposite side of the Black Sea to the Ukraine, the bit sticking out with Crimea there. So it's on the bottom where the green areas are on that map. And then it's been introduced as well. So yeah, so it means the rose tree from the Pontic regions. So when I moved to Shropshire with my parents in mid-teens, I came across new weeds in the garden. We moved from quite a different soil to a different area, and I came across this plant called Greater Celandine, which I'd never seen before. And I was curious, and when you weed it, you find it's got this really strong orange latex, which actually stained my clothes. And again, I couldn't work out where that was coming from initially. And I was curious, what do the names mean? Because I actually had a hunch what Chelidon meant, because I knew it from my fish keeping days. And Chelidon is a swallow, so Chelidonium means a swallow, and then it's the majus, which is the larger or greater form. So again, I couldn't see any association for why Chelidon or Chelidonium was used for this plant, because what does this plant have to do with swallows? But then come a few days' time, I was out in the garden again, and then I heard swallows overhead, and it just that was the connection. It starts to flower and supposedly finish when the swallows arrive, and then they leave again. From a similar origin of the words of swallow, we get the word celandine. You can see that they're all sort of related, so it's derived from the same origin. So celandine again means swallow, and if you look at other languages, like I think it's Swedish, they call it svalwort, which means swallowwort as well. So again, you start to think connections there. Celandine, oh, well, there's a lesser celandine, isn't there, as opposed to a greater celandine. So we've got a plant called Ficaria verna, although when I was learning it, it was Ranunculus ficaria. So again, what on earth is a Ficaria verna? That maybe sounds a bit familiar. You might have come across it before. So Ficaria means little figs, and it's the diminutive form of ficus or ficus. And some of you might grow ficus as a houseplant. So it's the fig tree. Ficus coryza is the edible fig. So verna means of spring, so that makes sense. It flowers in spring, doesn't it? It dies back quite early. By the end of May, the flowers have gone, and it's probably started to die back a lot. So again, what on earth does figs have to do with this particular plant? Well, if you look at the illustration, it was named by Linnaeus, and he was very well aware of medical issues and things like that, and he described Ficaria as little figs due to these little roots which are very rounded with a blunt end on them, which is one of the features that stops them being a ranunculus, and they're supposed to look like a bunch of little figs. But equally, another name for figs at the time was for hemorrhoids as well. And there was a medicinal crossover that it's very astringent. It was supposed to stop bleeding. So I imagine if you can stop blood flow to hemorrhoids, they're probably going to drop off instantly. So yes, like sometimes quite curious to see how they get these names. And then the old name ranunculus, a rana is a frog. As in Rana temporarea is our native frog, the common frog. So ranunculus just means little frog, and supposedly that name came about because of that sort of amphibious nature of some of the ranunculuses, some of the buttercups. So, and we can think of lesser and greater spearwort are good examples of that, can live in very deep water and very dry areas, and some of the other species as well. So where do scientific names sort of come from? Well, where do they evolve from? So we've had various people over the years propose different arrangements of scientific names, and you could just have your English name, your local vernacular name, but then you'd have an Italian with their Italian vernacular name and so on. So there was this gentleman called John Ray who worked on a classification of plants based on whole plant morphology, and he was one of the early people using the idea of a species concept. His later editions of his books divided plants into monocots and dicots, which some of you will remember from school days or university days as monocotyledons and dicotyledons, so one seed leaf or two seed leaves and so on. So but he was active, produced his catalogue Plantarium Angliae, or the English plant catalogue, really, and it was a rather dense, hard to read, certainly to us nowadays, but in the past, if you were cultured, you'd probably have been able to read Latin. And if we zoom in a minute, you'll see we translate some of that. So we've got just that snippet there, Aconitum napello simile sed minus Carillium precocious, and then JB. JB there is Johann Bohin. So that was his description for this particular plant. You'll see the next one is CB. That's another botanist, Caspar Bohin, the relation of Johann. There's Park, which is short for Parkinson, and there's Cluse, which is short for Clusius. So these are all descriptions. There's 4 or 5 descriptions there. Emac is Gerard Immaculatus, which is a funny way of saying it's Gerard's book freed from the blemishes of other people's influence. If we translate that, it makes it a bit easier. So the description that Parkinson used was, this is similar to Aconitum napello, but smaller, blue, and earlier. And that's Johann Bohin's description. Caspar Bohin called it, said it was the violet or napellus, and so on. Lycotomum, which is a different species of monkshood, but it was the early one, and so on. And it was to be found in the endless mountains of Tuareg, not far from Salzburg, in July it blooms, and it's a violet-flowered monkshood. So again, that's a bit of a mouthful. If we wanted to report to your friend or report it scientifically, to have to say that every time, but if we could just say Aconitum napellus, that would be an awful lot easier. So in this case, Aconitum is an old name used by Theophrastus, who was a Greek, for the poisonous, for this particular group of plants called aconites, or monkszoods as we now know them, from a particular hill in Pontus, I think it was. And then napellus, this links actually to a question somebody's had, but napellus means little or small turnips. It's the diminutive form of napus, which is your turnip. So it just means, if you've ever dug up, and hopefully not a wild monkshood, but a garden monkshood, and washed the roots off to propagate it, you'll see that they've got like little tuberous roots that look like little baby turnips. So that's the origin. So it's saying it's a plant that was named by Theophrastus as a poisonous plant and has little small turnips, not tulips, sorry. So here's something for you. If you want to write in a chat box in a minute, do you recognize this plant? So we used to have polynomials, many names. Now in science, we call them binomials, so two names. So here is an old polynomial for a particular plant, which is a Paralysis vulgaris pratensis Flora flower simplis odorata. So it's a plant that cleanly recommended for the treatment of paralysis. I don't think in this case it worked. It was common and growing in meadows. The flowers are golden yellow or flaxen coloured with simple or undivided petals, and they're scented. So I think we've got a chat function here. So if you want to just drop in the chat, if you've got any idea what this particular species might be.
Sorry, Mark, we don't have chat.
Yep.
We only have the Q&A.
Okay.
I'm afraid. Okay,
we'll stick it in the Q&A. Yeah, just write what you think it might be. So we've got a vote for St. John's wort. We've got buttercups. That's a good one. Dandelion. So you can see yellow plants. Or daffodil. More buttercups. Just give you a minute to run. A few more coming in. Oh, lady's bedstraw and goldenrod. Quite a few of those have medicinal uses, both old and modern as well. Like daffodils are quite widely used in medicine historically. Lady's bedstraw was. Yeah, so let's reveal it, see whether any of you were right. So it actually is cowslip or Primula veris. And I think if I'd have said to most of you before the meeting, do you know cowslip? You'd probably have known it, or do you know Primula veris? So it makes much easier to communicate. I've said Primula veris about 4 times now, as opposed to I can't remember the rest, that Paralysis vulgaris, that's about as far as I can remember. So again, it'd be useful to know, what does Primula veris mean? Well, prima is first. So primula means sort of spring flowering, or one of the first flowers. Prima rosa, I think you probably are aware of, is primrose, the first rose or flower. And then veris is another origin of spring. But again, the common names can be quite fun to work out what's going on. So I don't think we use it in common, certainly not in common language now, but slip was an old English name for dung. So you can see exactly what cowslip means then, cow dung. And supposedly it grows wherever a cow pat falls, which does, if you think about our nice meadows, wet meadows where you've got cattle in, you can imagine that it does appear to spring up from there. One more. So as I'm talking about this, you can write it in the Q&A box, see if you can work it out. So we've got a plant called Hippolepathum maximum rotundifolium exoticum, which again is a bit of a mouthful. So it's a foreign river sorrel with large round exotic leaves. So if people want to have a go in the Q&A box. So we've had a vote for horse chestnut, which, yeah, sounds quite good. The common name sorrel or sorrel is often used for something with quite a sharp taste to it. So we know about wood sorrel, and we know about common sorrel and sheep sorrel. If you taste all of those, actually have a similar taste. So we did once classify plants by their edibility and by their uses. So sorrel in this case does relate to the dock family, which quite a few, we've had a few water docks there. Rumex hydrolepathum. So somebody's put, if you break down hydrolepathum, it means hydro, water, lepathum, sorrel, so water dock. Docks and sorrels, common names. We've got one correct answer in there, which I shall reveal on the screen then. So yes, it is rhubarb. Well done to, I think, Fran it is. So again, it's a bit of a mouthful, although the scientific name is a bit of a mouthful as well, which is quite nice. But it's Ruum times Rhubarbarum, which I think currently, I've kept the taxonomy to follow, so the scientific names follow what's in Stace, the big sort of botanical Bible. I think now it's technically Ruum times hybridum. That cross means it's a hybrid. But Ruum is a Greek name, or it's a Greek form of a Persian name for the medicinal roots of this plant. So when we first had rhubarb in this country, it was as roots and as ground roots that we were taking it. And then Rhabarbarum, RHA, is a similar origin as Ruum, and then Barbarum means foreign. And if you think about barbaric and things, and Barbary, foreign, that again means foreign. So it was a foreign Ruum. If you look at it that way. So I think most of people will be familiar with this gentleman called Carl Linnaeus, or should I be calling them Carl von Linn or Carolus Linnaeus? He had so many names. He was ennobled, made a law equivalent of a lord. Well, that's when he got his von and things like that. So for somebody who sorted the world in order, I'm never quite sure what to call him, but we'll stick with Linnaeus for today. So he, again, stood on the shoulders of lots of other people. He brought together these ideas that people have and worked out a sort of system for nature where plants and animals were artificially classified based, in this case, on sexual features. And being a male botanist, you can work out what's the most important part of the flower. And that, of course, is going to be the stamen, the male bits, not the female parts, the stigma, the style, and ovary, the gynoecium. So as we would now classify plants based on their female reproductive parts. So he split plants into two groups early on. You can see on the left side, you've got Nuptiae plantarum, so as a nuptial. So he had monoclinia, which if I make it bigger than that, monoclinia, if you translate it, it means the husband and wife enjoy one and the same bed. So it's meaning that both the floral parts, male and female, are within the same flower. So, or else we have diclinia, the husband and wife are happy in their separate homes. So getting a bit racy stuff, isn't it? For if you were a lady botanist of the era, sometimes you weren't allowed to be seen this. It was just considered too racy for Georgian gentlewomen. The problems with that, it's an artificial classification based on, in this case, the stamens. We've got issues like we've got wavy bittercress and hairy bittercress, and one of the key ID features is that hairy bittercress has 4 stamen. What do I mean? Yeah, 4. And flexuosa has 6 stamen. So if that was the case, they're being totally different families, not even related, when clearly they are so closely related that they can sometimes be quite tricky to separate. So, but what the bit we really did take from Linnaeus, what was really useful, was he took really went to town with a binomial system, the idea of having 2 names for every species, a genus name and a species name. So, and where do we get that from in his publications? You'll see top of the page on the left, we've got Syringa, which is the genus name for lilac. And then you've got various words like Follis ovata caudatus, so that's leaves are ovate, egg-shaped, to heart-shaped, and that was in the Hortus cliffortianus. And there's various other descriptions. And just to the right, there's vulgaris written. And if we drop down a level as well, we've got Syringa there, repeated again with Folis lanceolatum, so more spear-like, and then Persica. So this is where we get our binomials from, Syringa vulgaris. That's sometimes the first place that scientific name has ever been used. And I think Linnaeus did an amazing job pulling information from everywhere else, synthesizing it and putting it into this area. So you may find that scientific name had been used by Ray or Parkinson before, but this is sort of our date stamp that we use as a baseline. So yeah, Syringa vulgaris. So Linnaeus, because he had that option, that luxury to name plants, he sometimes named them in honor of his colleagues, his friends, personal heroes, and students. he also sometimes named them after his enemies, so it can be quite amusing. So this is a tropical tree called Bauhinia. The common name is orchid trees, which superficially the flowers vaguely look orchid-like. If you screw your eyes up a bit, again shows the issue with common names. But the genus name, oh, look at the leaves, how they're, I always think they look a bit like a camel's footprint or that sort of cloven hoof. They've got a paired leaf. They haven't separated, so they're two halves of a leaf that neatly fold up. And he was recognizing here Johann Bohin and also Caspar Bohin, two Swiss-French botanists who worked closely together, and this was showing the two lobes working their close working relationship. It said in many texts that they were two brothers. In fact, they weren't. One, I think it was Johann was the uncle of Caspar. Then another person who gets recognised, this plant has been naturalised in the British Isles. It's more of an urban tree, isn't it? But Magnolia stellata meaning stellate. But where does Magnol come from? Well, it comes from Pierre Magnol, who was a French botanist at Royal Botanic Gardens of Montpellier, and he was also one of those innovators who devised a botanical system of classification as well, and really worked on the concept of plant families as they're known today. So a real leading person. And Linnaeus obviously thought a lot of him because he said it has handsome leaves and flowers which recall a splendid botanist, Magnol. Sometimes there's little inside jokes, like this beautiful species. This has got occasionally naturalized. It's more of a greenhouse weed than anything else. Some of you might know houseplants called Tradescantias. It's related to that anyway. So Commelinea communis. You can see there are two people here. Sorry, these are the nephews and uncle. The Bohins were the brothers. So they work closely together, and Linnaeus wrote that Commelinea has flowers with 3 petals, 2 of which are showy, while a third is not conspicuous. You see that pale green, almost translucent structure behind the stamens and the stigma. And that's it was named, he said, from the 2 botanists called Commeline, for the third died before accomplishing anything in botany, which is a bit sad really. It wasn't quite true. Johann's brother, also a Casparius, was a bookseller and newspaper publisher, but apparently if you only do that, you're probably dead to Linnaeus. So yeah. Linnaeus also rewarded people he didn't like as well. So this is a species that's very, very occasionally found in the wild. I've never spotted it yet. It's sort of an urban weed. It's a bit like your groundsels and your ragworts that sort of loiter around streets. Siegsbeckia serrata. It's covered in these hairs, which are glandular hairs, and they've got a very strong, unpleasant smell. So Johann George Siegsbeck did not like the work that Linnaeus was doing. He was a really strong critic, and he considered that Linnaeus's ideas were loathsome harlotry, unnatural and repugnant and immoral, because they focused on the sex organs of plants, and that's not what you would do if you're a godly person, I suppose. So Linnaeus rewarded him with Siegsbeckia, which he describes as a stinking little weed, which is, again, no good epitaph for somebody. So I've kept using terms like classification and taxonomy and nomenclature. So classification is just the way plants and animals are arranged and grouped. Taxonomy is that branch of science that deals with that. Nomenclature is the process of choosing and devising names and almost the laws. And then etymology is the study of the origin of words. So, and we're looking at the etymology. So we'll really dive into the etymology now. So sometimes, certainly when I've got students, they worry about spelling, and occasionally it's really important. So there's a species here, Euphorbia peplus. Peplis, even I've got it wrong, which Dioscorides, who was an ancient Greek who wrote a Materia Medica, a name for a Mediterranean coastal spurge, he described Euphorbia peplis as that. But you might know in your garden you have a common weed called petty spurge, Euphorbia peplis, and Dioscorides had this as a northern equivalent of peplis. So peplis is a Mediterranean species. It has been recorded in Britain and Ireland. I think Ireland was the 1840s, Cornwall about the 1940s, and I think Channel Islands was 1970s. And it's in a Schedule 8, so it's a protected plant, certainly in England and Wales. Whereas, yeah, you can see the old records there. Whereas peplis is just widespread. It's everywhere in the British Isles. So certainly the lowlands, I say everywhere, but yeah. So Euphorbia was named after Euphorbus, the physician to the king of Mauritania, who used the latex of spurge for various medicinal purposes, which leads me nicely onto medicinal plants. So you'll see there's an awful lot of plants with the word officinalis in their names, which are organisms used in medicine, herbalism, manufacturing and cookery. And they were derived in their own meanings from the word officina, which is the storeroom of a monastery. So you can imagine going to a monk I live in Shropshire, so we've got Cadfael around here, the Cadfael books. You can imagine going to Brother Cadfael and he would have all of these in pots on his shelves or in the garden. So we've got things like Bistorta officinalis, and bi or bi means two, and torta means twisted. So in this case, it's got referred to the twisted roots. That's where that scientific name's come, and it's the useful herbal form of Bistorta. But you can see lots of interesting plants there. Some of these that you'll use in cooking, like sage and maybe even lemon balm and pot marigold. And then one of my favourites is ginger down there, Zingiber officinalis. But more common garden weeds like hedge mustard and species like that. And I'm always in awe of the amount of knowledge that people had in the past. So we have Devil's bit scabious, which I'm sure some of you will know comes from the name. The devil supposedly was annoyed with this particular plant because this was the plant that the Virgin Mary supposedly used, thwarted the devil on. The devil from underground came up and bit the root of this plant. And if I've potted these up, I grow quite a lot of native plants. I potted them up before now, washed the roots off, and you'll find they're beautifully truncated, and then they have a tiny little root on the end. And it does very much look like somebody's come along and snipped off the end. So that name's that sort of cultural usage is included in there, but also succedo means to cut off below as well. So you can see there succeed, glaber and so on. Then we've got plants like great burnet, and I remember surveying a fantastic hay meadow, a floodplain hay meadow in Staffordshire, and this an old lady was in the group at one point on one of the open days and was telling me how she used to use this, and I'd already knew that sanguis means bloody, so sanguine, yes, you've got blood, and sorbus is absorbing, but she said oh yes, well what we used to do is if we had a nosebleed in the field, we'd just stick it up your nostril, and it's almost the perfect, well it is the perfect size to go up a nostril to stem bleeding. So it was traditionally used that, and various powders were made from it as well, ground up. All of these things I'm not recommending you try. So, which leads us on to smells. So there's lots of different words for smells, and some of them can be pleasant. So you could have Viola odorata, which is your one of your violets, which has a very pleasant smell. But then you've got Helleborus fetidus, which is stinking hellebore. So these words can actually tell you something. I think pungens is an interesting one, because to me, I've always thought as pungens as being a sharp, sorry, as a smell, but it can also be used to define anything sharp. So you've got Picea pungens, which is the I've forgotten which particular spruce it is, and it's got very sharp needles as well. So it can be used in many ways. And there's some very quirky smells. For instance, have you ever smelt a weasel? I'm sure, James, you must have done. So there's Lamiastrum galeopdilum subspecies montanum. So what does galeopdilum mean? Well, it means smelling of weasels. And I'm curious. I've smelt the plant numerous times, but I've never smelt a weasel to know if there's any connection. So it's an interesting one. There's another view that maybe it's actually the shape of the flowers looking like a weasel's snout or a weasel nose, that it could come from, that sort of drawn in shape. But yeah, not quite got to the bottom of that one. So we've got a few endings of names. So here we've got equal leaf knotgrass, which is a common plant. You can see it growing there in some block paving. It grows on farm tracks, quite small, quite diminutive. And if we have, you see on the end of the name, Polygonum arenastrum, astrum means somewhat like, or it could be the wild form or inferior to. And in this case, aranon is a sandwort. So it's the looking superficially like a sandwort, which if you have them growing side by side or intermingled, you might find it a challenge to separate. Likewise, dead nettle, lamium, we know lamium, but there's also yellow archangel, lamiastrum. So you can see that the wild lamium is another way of saying a yellow archangel. Same for some of the goosefoots as well. I'm just gonna. Some of these you can look back on later. I'm just going to talk through, skip a few. So we've got the word pseudo, which means false or a sham, and so it's the false platanus if we've got sycamore. And if you look at the leaves on the top right of a London plane or something like that, they do look very sycamore-like as well. So, and where does that name sycamore come from? It's the Greek name for a fig or a mulberry plant. And Sikos is, there we are, we've got the name for a fig, and moron is mulberry. So it's to do with the shape of the leaves, supposedly. So, which if you close your eyes a bit, you can see. One little bit in a minute to work out. So Roman salvager, what on earth's that? So we've got this group of plants called phylagos or cudweeds, but sometimes botanists like, or taxonomists like to have a bit of fun. And in this case, phylago, it means thread-like, referring to the woolly hairs on the leaves, but there are an awful lot of them. And if any of you have been working or looking at this group, you'll find they're quite a bit confusing recently, because we've got phylagos, we've got gifolas, iflogos, lithagos, or glyphias. They're all anagrams, aren't they, of phylago? And that's a way of showing that they're related to each other. It's just a little shorthand. And there's a few other examples coming up as well. So you might know Lephangium, which is the new name for Jersey cudweed. I learned it as Nephalium, but again, it's an anagram of those. So likewise, Telimia, which is a mitterwort, a species that I've found often naturalizing by streams, and it's an anagram of Mytelia. And you can see they've got similar flowers. They're in the same family, but they were at one point put in the same genus, but somebody decided to split them. I'm going to skip that one. You can, as I say, look back at them. So there are so many different colours of the rainbow, and words like azuria meaning blue, cesius means that purplish blue, and so on, sanguinium, blood, red, crimson. So all of those are useful. I find that's a good way of remembering them. Then there's numerous shades of green, as we can see. So if somebody says something's a glaucous colour, it's that dull green to greyish blue colour. Whereas if you have an emerald green, it's smaragdinus, and so on. Snow white. This is violet lacteus. So lacteus means a particular kind of white. That's a milky white. And you can see here that actually this pale dog violet, it does vary a bit in colour. But if you wanted a pure white, you'd be using a word like candidus. And then if you wanted a white but had an underlying colour, some other colour, you might have albescens or deal barter as well. Beautiful little plant, Ornithopus. Again, bird's foot, ornitho, bird, pus, pus is a foot, and that's repeated in the common name. Then perpucilis, what on earth does that mean? Well, if we look it up, we'll find that there are various little names for small things, and if you're very small, you're a pucillus or perpucillus. So it's just another way of describing height. So one to concentrate on there, we've got acetosa. If you remember, I talked about sorrels earlier. We could have wood sorrel and common sorrel, or we could have sheep sorrel and common sorrel. Sheep sorrel is Rumex acetosella, whereas common sorrel is Rumex acetosa, and the putting the ella on the end of the name means that it's a smaller form of. And once you get that in your head, you can start to remember which way round to remember the common names. So ella is generally a diminutive, means it's smaller in size, or could be paler as size. So if you've got the garden plant Clematis viticella, it's the little vine or vitis with an ella on the end, so small vine. As I say, I'm going to scroll through some slides but not talk because I'm running out of time. You can watch them back. This is always a fun one, Potentilla anserina. Some of you may be birders and you may go, oh, answer, I recognise that. So answer means goose. Answer is your grey-legged goose, and supposedly the leaves here are the same size and shape and sort of colouring of a goose's feather. So that's the origin. So we've got ornithopoda there, bird's foot as well. You'll start to see that name used regularly. Species like this, Lycopodium lagopus is a real mixture. Lyco is wolf, and then Lagos is hare, so it's a real hunter and the hunted here. So, and pus or podium means foot, so it's a bit of a confusion there. You've got a wolf's foot with hare's feet as well. So let's go back to that one. So Aquilegia, vulgaris columbine, really pretty garden plant, but also a native. Aquiline means eagles, and supposedly the nectaries, which are those blue-purple structures that reach up and curl round, are meant to look rather like an eagle's claw. I can't quite see it. I suppose I haven't been on the wrong end of an eagle, but looking, I can see it more as 5 doves that are just sort of cooing, and you can see their petals are the wings, or sorry, the sepals are the wings they're out, and they're sort of meant to look like doves all billing and cooing, and that's the origin of columbine is dove as well. So, and I realise my time is running out as well. So there are some names which we've got town hall clock or moscatel. I'd like to use both because I think it's quite useful, but if you put an A in front, sometimes it means without, and if you're doxer, it means without glory, honour or praise or splendour. I think it's a real sad name for this because I think this is a plant whenever I see I get excited because there's nice habitats. And then moscatellina means musk-like, and put L on the end, it's a little, and so it's a flower without praise. It smells a little bit musky, which is, yeah, I've tried smelling it. I've only ever smelt the smell of the earth rather than the smell of the flower. So I'd be curious to know if other people get that smell, or whether it's just my nose. And for almost my final slide, something's completely different. We're looking at a I've forgotten what it is now, bacterial mold. But you can see there are some names that are taken from local place names. So we could have had Hibernica, so we could have Sorbus hibernica, which is, I think that's Irish white bean, Hibernica Irish. We could have there's a plant which I've got now called Scotica, so Scotland and so on. So they could all have that, or you could have endings. Words that end with ENSIS, so ensis. So there's an example here of a horrendous name for me, and it's pronounced, well, exactly the way you think it is. You can pronounce it yourself. So how do we break that down? We've got Myxococcus, mucus scarlet, so it has scarlet mucus, and then it's named after Ensis, belonging to or from, and it's named after that particular village in Anglesey, where this species was first recorded. This is a soil microbe, I think. I probably got that totally wrong. So yes. So as I don't know whether there's time or not, but if there's any questions people have got, then certainly, yeah.
That is absolutely fantastic, Mark. I can't believe it's been almost an hour. It's gone in an absolute flash. Particularly entranced with, was it weasel scented for Galeoptylon?
Yeah.
Galeoptylon,
yeah.
Yeah, which
yeah.
is
I
one
think
of the subspecies of yellow archangel is only found in my county of North Lincolnshire. So that's a very good fact for me to be aware of.
So you need to go and sniff your weasels.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we are close to 8 o'clock. We do have some questions in the chat. One of them stands out to me that could be really useful for people who are really interested. Thanks for the really informative webinar. I think we can all agree with that. I'm just wondering, do you know any books on the subject that you would recommend?
Yes, there are quite a few books. There's a really nice book called The Names of Plants by Gledhill. I can send an email to James afterwards, and he can presumably send it on. There's of course the amazing botanist William Stern, who's written 2 books, one called Botanical Latin, which is very dense and it's not the easiest, but he's also got the Dictionary of Plant Names for Gardeners, that helps. And there is a nice book called A Primer of Botanical Latin with Vocabulary, which is almost a book of how to read Stern's Botanical Latin book. So there are an awful lot out there.
Brilliant.
So,
Fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, I did have a slide of that actually. There's, of course, because I expected that. Let me go to the end.
Yeah, if you've got any other recommendations, we can put them in the YouTube description and everything as well, so people can follow up on those books.
Yeah, there's some very entertaining reads here. The Naming of the Shrew by John Wright and Stephen Hurd's Charles Darwin's Barnacles and David Barry's Spiders, and they're good Christmas stocker books. Yeah, that's the thing. I spotted a question in there. I don't know if we've got time, but there's one on what's a buckler. Yeah, I was curious about that. So we've got the shield ferns which are pelisticums, and we've got the buckler ferns, which are the group Dratris. Shield fern was named because the indusia, the scales on the which hide the spores, are round and like a shield. So think of an old-fashioned, almost like going to battle with your old-fashioned dustbin lid. You're holding it in the middle, and you've got a disc. Now, buckle is another kind of shield that you'd have gone in, and it's a slightly different shape. So that's where buckler comes from. So these people who were naming them were plants and things were probably classicists and things like that. They knew a lot about their histories, far more than I know about. Those sort of things.
I'm really pleased because I was thinking buckler shield. I've heard that in the past. So that's fascinating. There's a theme to it.
There is. So vulgaris, what does vulgaris mean? It's common. So for a lot of our wild plants, we will have common vulgaris in their name. So there's Alchemilla vulgaris, isn't there? And I can't think of others now. But yes, lots of vulgaris things. Endings, there's a question there about what's the difference between officinalis and officinale. That's a little bit above my pay grade, but it will depend on the genus name, whether it's a feminine or masculine, and the endings will change according to that. Veronica Becker-Bunger. Yes, I knew someone would ask about that. So I have a very old slide from an old talk. So Veronica Becker-Bunger, there we are. Oh, sorry, that's not where we are. So what's Veronica, named after Saint Veronica, or Bernice as well as another origin. Beck is an old Norse name for a brook, and if you bung up your beck, you stop the brook, which actually describes this plant quite well. That it grows, forms a big mass in a brook rather, and we think brook lime again, a lemmic, they haven't really. It's a small plant, so something that clogs the brook again. So they're both sort of circular names, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
Blocks the brook was that. So it's bunged
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. It is bunged up. It's where the word bung comes from. Yeah, similar origin. Yeah. So
Wow,
yeah,
that is fantastic.
yeah. So
Brilliant.
yeah.
I'm just scrolling through. I think lots of people just saying they've had a wonderful time. Somebody's asked about the colours of the rainbow slide. Well,
Oh
it'll
yeah.
be in the video, and you can pause on that and have a good look on that. So, is there anything else you'd like to add, Mark?
No, I think that's it because we're time's up. I could go on for another hour, but I should talk.
Well, that has
Yes.
been absolutely fascinating. I've really, really enjoyed that. I can't wait to kind of watch that back again and pause on some of those slides that you whizzed past, and maybe treat myself to some of those books you recommended, because yeah, it's already kind of opened my eyes to lots of things I'd never considered. So thank you so much. Thank you to the 150 odd people who've joined us this evening. That's fantastic. This video will go up on YouTube. We'll put a link on the Northern Ireland Botanical Skills Project page, so you will be able to find it. Thanks again to our funder, DARA, for supporting this programme and thus this series of talks. And do look at the rest of our programme. And Mark will be back with us in 2 weeks to talk about Leylandii. So yeah, please do join us again in future. And with that, I will say goodbye to everyone. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the evening and a wonderful rest of the week, and hopefully see you at another one of these in future. Good night.
Bye all.